Hello and welcome to VR Download. I'm Ian Hamilton coming to you from virtual reality. We're using Quest standalone VR headsets with hand tracking and meta avatars to record this show, despite the fact that I've never met my co host and he lives in a completely different part of the world. If you're watching us on YouTube, we've got Stevie the TV up here to show images and videos, as well as our tablets here where we can see viewer comments live during our recording session. Let's get into the news today with my co host, David Heaney. Heaney, what do we have coming up today?
We have a lot of topics to discuss today. So if you go to UploadVR.com, you'll see we've just published an article that quotes Mark Zuckerberg from a recent interview he gave, where he talked about the fact that face and eye tracking is a big priority for Meta in the next version of Quest. Then we're going to be talking about some job listings we found that suggest that future Meta headsets may have cellular connectivity, such as 5G. We're also going to be talking about the reported cancellation of Meta's next generation operating system project. We'll be talking about an AI concept they showed off, which is kind of a very early idea of a holodeck. And then we'll be talking about Gabe Newell, the president of Valve's comments he recently gave about the prospect of Valve releasing a standalone headset. And after all that's out of the way, we'll talk about Sony revealing the design for the PlayStation VR2. So we have a lot to talk about today. Let's get into it.
Yeah, we're going to get through all the meta stuff right here near the beginning of the show. And let's I want to say thank you to our sponsors, Les Mills Body Combat. This podcast was sponsored by them. They've got 30 workouts to get results for the people looking to work out in VR out there. And the game brings the body combat experience to your VR headset. You can get that on the Oculus store today, and there should be a link down in our description. All right, so this first piece of news, Heaney, Mark Zuckerberg said face and eye tracking are a big focus for the next version of the Quest. He suggested Meta will prioritize those features over making headsets as thin and light as possible. Do you think that's the right priority there, Heaney? Is it really more important that we get true face and eye tracking versus lighter headsets?
Well, Mark Zuckerberg certainly seems to think so. So this quote comes from an interview he gave to Lex Fridman, the Lex Fridman podcast. It's one of my favorite podcasts, and I would recommend you watch the entire episode. I think it's somewhere between 2 and 3 hours because they actually cover a very wide range of topics, everything from identity in the metaverse to censorship. He even asked Zuckerberg at one point if he's afraid of death. There really is a wide range of topics here, and it's one of the best interviews I think anyone's ever given to Zuckerberg because they kind of give the time for him to answer, just like in a lot of Lex's interviews where he does that. But one of the things that Zuckerberg said in this was that he pointed out that there's an entire region of your brain that's focused on reading facial cues. So he said, when we're designing the next version of Quest or the VR headset, a big focus for us is face tracking and basically eye tracking so you can make eye contact, which isn't something that you can do over video conference. And this is echoes comments Zuckerberg made a year ago in an interview with The Information, where he said, one of the things I'm really excited for in future versions is getting eye tracking and face tracking in. And you'll know that Project Cambria is Meta's headset that they plan to launch this year. It's a high-end headset, they've said, and they've said that it will have face and eye tracking. But when Zuckerberg was announcing Cambria, he specifically said, in fact, these were the first words he said, this isn't the new Quest. Sorry, this isn't the next Quest. It's a completely new, advanced, and high-end product. So based on that, and based on the fact that in the interview a year ago, Zuckerberg actually had talked about having teams spun up on Quest 3 and Quest 4, I think it is likely that he really is talking about Quest 3 in these comments, not just Cambria. And so, whether it's the right decision or not, if Meta wants to push its vision of social VR and have it actually feel like you're sitting across or standing across or shooting alongside in a multiplayer game your friends or another person from across the world, you really do need face and eye tracking in there to convey the kind of social cues that are just a normal part of human communication. And anyone who's watching this right now, you may wonder, do we have face tracking here? And no, it's not. It's actually that it's just taking the microphone input and finding out what is the most likely lip shape from the microphone input, and that's a machine learning model. But if we could actually make eye contact, if you could actually see my facial expression, it would really just add a lot more to the feeling of actually being across from you, which just isn't there in VR yet.
Mm. Very, very interesting discussion there, and I'm seeing people in our comments. I want to say hi to Anthony and Bicycle, Anthony, Adam, everyone else, Wolveraza, Technoglitch, Artful. Thank you all for tuning in this week. Yeah, I like the CAPTCHA given at the beginning to Mark Zuckerberg he had to pass the robot test there right at the beginning of that interview to prove he was a human. And Zuckerberg's reaction to that seemed genuine in the clip I saw. Like we had talked on a previous podcast where I have no mental image in my head of Zuckerberg seeming, smiling and laughing. And that was one of the first examples of that I've ever seen in that interview. But I do wonder how rare that kind of interview is. You're kind of pointing out, Heaney, like, didn't Lex comment before this that like uh, no approved questions or something like that? It was one of the ground rules for this discussion with him.
Yeah, he did, and that's always something that Lex does. I'll make no secret of the fact that I'm a huge fan of Lex podcast, and that one of the things he always does is to make sure that it is a genuine conversation. He doesn't want to do some kind of TV anchor style scripted sound bites. He wants to really understand what the guest is saying. And as you say, Zuckerberg came across more human in this interview than in any interview ever before, and it really kind of revealed how he thinks about this and where he may be taking Meta in the future. So anyone who's interested in this topic, in the metaverse, in what Meta might do, I would highly recommend you take the time to listen to the entire interview. But kind of coming back on this eye tracking thing, one of the other things that Zuckerberg suggested was that they would prioritize this, as you said, over making headsets slimmer and lighter. And he said, it's not clear to me that any of the other companies that are focused on the metaverse or VR AR are going to prioritize these features. It adds some weight to the device, it adds some thickness. And he said that he could totally see other companies deciding to make the thinnest and lightest headset possible. But he said, and this is the direct quote, I want us to design the most human thing possible that creates the richest sense of presence.
So I have two thoughts on this, Heaney. If you go back to like our previous episode, I was specifically talking about sign language in VR, and that these headsets kind of do need. I think of sign language as a bar to achieve in making this whole proposition of VR headsets using to connect over distance actually really meaningfully changing people's lives like that. If you can have people who uh, are deaf able to communicate as close to their real world communication as possible, then you're able to collapse physical distance in a very meaningful way for a very large segment of people. And you need those subtle facial expressions combined with great hand tracking to truly pull that off. So there's that mindset there that in some ways I think he's probably right in sort of prioritizing this. But these headsets still feel like face bricks. So it's hard to kind of say that the very next device needs to have this when um, weight loss on these headsets is also so important as well. So it's really hard for me to think through whether these priorities are in the right place when we're talking the next generation of these headsets.
Yeah, that's something we've heard the incoming CTO of Meta, Andrew Bosworth, talk about a lot. And it's something that people have talked about in the VR hardware space for years. VR is currently a very early technology, and there are so many directions it can go. You can get these extra sensors, you can get a wider field of view, you can get higher resolution, you can make them thinner and lighter. But a lot of these ideas are conflicting with each other to the point where increasing one will make the other worse. So these companies are going to have to make very kind of important priority decisions about what do they really care about delivering in these products. And as you say, these still are face bricks. The Quest 2 that I have in my head right now is 500 grams. And I'm quite sure that in 5 or 10 years, that will seem just as silly as the big CRT televisions and monitors that used to be around in normal. But how do you get to something that is comfortable enough to wear all day while also adding in all these sensors and while also doing other things like increase the field of view? It's going to take a lot of hard engineering, but at times there are going to be decisions that they have to make where they have to say, this is what we care about. And Zuckerberg is setting out in this interview that being able to convey your facial expression, your eye contact, and your emotion is something that he cares about more than almost anything else in a headset.
So, since we're talking about next features, I'm just going to list off the next two news stories we've got here because they're both meta related, and we want to really move on here as fast as we can to the Valve and Sony stuff we've got planned. But we also found a bunch of job listings over there at Meta that seem to suggest that they are really getting serious about exploring cellular features in future VR and AR headsets. And then the other news is that Meta reportedly stopped work on a next generation operating system for its VR and AR headsets and reassigned the team with hundreds of employees who had been working on it. This report actually uh, sort of hinted or suggested that some of the people on this team working on this OS, even though work had stopped on it quite a while ago, they were kind of told recently that they're working that they need to go find another team, and some of the members of this team apparently don't even know what they're going to work on yet. Heaney, that can you give us some context on these two stories real quick, and then we'll go back to the original subject of what are the next features we're likeliest to see in these next generation headsets.
Yeah, for sure. Just first, I'm going to reply to Onakazi's comment. He points out correctly that saying that they're not going for the lightest doesn't mean that the next headset won't be lighter than Quest 2. That's valid to say. But I think what Zuckerberg's saying is they could go even lighter if they weren't going to put these kind of features in. But yeah, as you say, we've got two other meta stories here. One of them is these job listings. So we've seen job listings like antenna research scientist and cellular firmware engineer with job descriptions like develop Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, and cellular antenna concepts for VR and AR products. So obviously, when it comes to AR glasses in the future, you're going to want cellular connectivity so that it doesn't have to be tethered to your phone. You don't have to bring a phone along. That would kind of defeat the purpose of eventually replacing a phone, as we've heard executives from Meta suggest is their long-term goal. On a VR headset, it would be one of those nice to have things. You know, there's when you get an iPad from Apple today, you can get a Wi-Fi model or you can get a model with Wi-Fi and cellular. I think when it comes to the headsets that you use in your home, that's likely the path we'll see, where if you're someone that's going to not be in your home Wi-Fi a lot and you're on the move between different maybe hotels that you don't want to rely on their spotty Wi-Fi, or even just going on a train or something like that, then that could be useful. But it'll be interesting to see whether that really does come to their headsets or if it's just something for their glasses.
Mm. And there's, of course, the power consumption that is going to weigh against those cellular features, right? And a lot of people, when we talk about cellular, they kind of imagine the end game of using a cloud rendering system to do part of the visual rendering. And that's really not what we're talking about. Having an active connection to your cell tower like that, just constantly beaming stuff back and forth at full bandwidth, is not going to work even in the near term, right? Like that's too much battery draw. What we're talking about is maybe being able to download a couple gigabyte game to your headset and then run it locally just as you would normally on a Quest. That seems like a far more reasonable thing that we would have middle term versus the longer term.
Yeah.
We do need to get back to the security issues on the face and eye tracking because that is going to be a huge concern from people. Uh, is there what do people need to think about going back to that original you know when we talk about face and eye tracking being in headsets, you started off explaining how it can make this social interaction we're having right now far better. But this is coming from Meta, a company that is criticized globally for its influence on social interactions. Do we need to be concerned in any way about that being the highest priority for Meta?
Well, I'm just going to address the first kind of question you asked me, which was about the cellular before I move into that. I thought we were going to kind of talk about that for a bit. Um, there's been a lot of hype around 5G in recent years to the point where a lot of people have described it as one of the most hyped technologies that's ever kind of come to fruit, because people talk about 5G as if it's some sort of radical different kind of connectivity, when in reality it's essentially just faster and lower latency 4G. So any of the potential applications like cloud rendering, would be just as valid to happen on Wi-Fi. And in fact, because if you're going to be playing a high fidelity game, you're probably in your house with Wi-Fi anyway. People that kind of bring up 5G as a enabler of these technologies, I think that's a little bit misguided. So that seems like it'll happen through home connectivity. And just coming back to, I think the next question was about the privacy and kind of ethical
Yeah.
concerns of face and eye tracking. Yeah, of course. When you get to the point where you can detect what a person is actually looking at and detect their facial expression as they look in that has serious potential implications for what advertisers could learn about users or what targeted advertising platforms could learn. Instead of just knowing whether you tap on an advertisement by engaging, you can see which parts of the ad drew the user's attention the most, which part makes them laugh or smile or even make a kind of angry grimacing face. There are huge privacy implications of this technology that need to be sorted out before this can be deployed widely to consumers. And we just don't know yet what kind of model Meta is going to take here, because there's no real way that you can sandbox this. You can't simultaneously let developers use the eye position to point to the virtual pupil and somehow not have them know where the eye is looking, because that's just a simple, cast out the ray from the eye and where does it intersect. There's no magical way that you can stop developers from using that information unless you just cut them off from eye tracking completely and say it's only for foveated rendering. But then you lose out on all of the social aspects of eye tracking that Zuckerberg was talking about. So it's really unclear what way they're going to be able to protect that. Currently on the Oculus platform, they require each developer to fill out a pretty lengthy data use checkup, and you have to describe exactly what user data you use, how you use it, and where you store it. And Meta every so often will do checkups. How well that system's going to work at scale when you have, thousands and tens of thousands of VR apps, how well that's going to work on the web, on WebXR, if it gets eye tracking support, where Meta is not doing any kind of moderation there, how well that's going to work when you can just sideload an application from any developer. There are huge questions here, but we already kind of use technologies every day that have huge privacy implications. Mike, if you give an application access to your microphone for speech recognition or for voice calls, there are massive implications there. They could be listening to your response to advertising, for example. So there are a lot of unanswered questions here, but I don't think it's a completely new precedent. I think it's just stepping up a kind of trend that's been happening over the past 2 decades.
Very much a sense of like saying the quiet part out loud to me, of this whole evolution, right? Where you've got Facebook or Meta saying that they're going to remove the Facebook requirement from the headsets, but if they're able to associate your facial and eye tracking data with a whole lot of other information about you, whether or not you've got your profile information listed from like who you were back in when you graduated college. Like you've got that profile info listed on your Facebook profile. That's not going to be as valuable to advertisers as the profile that can be built off of face and eye tracking data. And maybe you don't, maybe that policy that Facebook needed to stop trolls of using your real identity, um, maybe that no longer is necessary. Maybe they realized architecturally, really, as long as they focus on face and eye tracking and have that data, uh, that creates a more valuable profile, even if it's not necessarily attached to your real identity. Is that where we're heading, Heaney?
Yeah, there's this idea already called fingerprinting, digital fingerprinting, where even if you don't have a login or unique ID for a user, simply by something like the way they scroll down the page on a phone, the resolution of their screen and the shape and their position, their IP address, the language of their browser, all of these tiny little details that an application can gain that are slightly different from user to user, researchers have shown that they can actually, in many cases, uniquely identify you based on that. So when you start to get things like how your eyes move around a scene or the kind of facial expressions you make combined with maybe, how you move your hands, it's very possible that we could get a VR or AR fingerprinting technology developed by some of these advertising companies that could do exactly that. And that's one of the things you would hope that operating systems would try to protect against by kind of maybe randomizing or spoofing some of this at times. But there's no obvious, easy answer to it that can magically work around it.
Hmm. See, I think that's where we get to kind of the real core of this issue is we have been paying attention to the researchers at Meta and Facebook over the years, sort of exploring whether eye tracking was necessary for some of their advances in display technology. So, whether you absolutely needed eye tracking for foveated rendering in order to render the right amount of detail, or whether they could do it any other way. And it is going to be so key to social interaction, but are there are there ways of doing it without the trackers? I guess is the fundamental question, right? Like, can they improve their AI models so that this gets even more uh, immersive over time just by improving their models, or do they really need those extra sensors on the device to improve things significantly? Is this good enough? Is my way of getting yeah? Is this good enough?
So I think with eye tracking, we're pretty much there's no way that you could use a machine learning model to infer the eye what the eye is looking at more than they have today. So developers in applications like this, right now, I define the gaze priority of each object by how kind of salient it would be to an eye. And I look at my finger and it has a certain priority. I look over at Ian's head and it has a certain priority. I look into the camera and it has just as high priority as a head. And you could imagine a machine learning model that could maybe automatically tag things by saliency, but it's still going to be wrong a lot of the time. There's still going to be times where you look at something that is less salient than the most salient thing. So you're going to need a physical sensor there. When it comes to face tracking, Meta actually did show some very interesting research either last year or the year before, where just based on your microphone input, including the tiny little sounds that your lips make by touching together and kind of when you're breathing, that they could come up with a fairly reasonable approximation of your facial expression. And including as you talk, how you talk, they can kind of extrapolate this. But again, there's still going to be a lot missing there. There's still going to be when you smile, it's not going to pick that up. So, as Zuckerberg kind of alluding to in this interview, if you really want to convey someone's social expressions and their eye tracking, sorry, their uh, eye contact, there's really no other way than to put a sensor in the hardware. And we're seeing that with other hardware as well. PlayStation VR2 that's announced has eye tracking, which Sony has described as one of the key use cases being for social experiences. And I'd imagine that any other major headset that's coming in the next few years will have that as a feature as well, simply because of all the possible uses for it, including foveated rendering, social UI interaction. If you have your hand pointed at something and the system, because of the tracking quality, isn't quite sure what you're pointed at, they can just say, "Well, what are you looking at?" And the use case that you always like to point out, Ian, which is if you're throwing at something, obviously controllers today are very imperfect, so you're not going to be able to capture your throw exactly as you threw. But if you're throwing while looking at something, the system has a pretty good idea that that's probably what you're targeting. And you can kind of get a bit of an aim assist there, which, I think you've tried it in the past and others have tried it, dramatically improves the kind of throwing accuracy in virtual reality and makes throwing objects actually practical.
Yeah, Toby. Toby gave me that demo, oh, I want to say 5 years ago now, maybe even more, where I had that exact demo that he just described from Toby, the sort of leading independent eye tracking company at this time. And we have seen still today that technology kept for only the highest end headsets because it adds all those extra things that Zuckerberg is basically saying are necessary, in his opinion, for future headsets. All right. Do you want to talk any more here, Heaney, about these other two subjects, about the cellular or about the reassigning of the XROS team?
Yeah, I guess we should talk about the XROS team. So again, yeah, if anyone didn't see the news here, Meta has been open about the fact that for a few years now it was working on a completely new operating system, which would replace the operating system used in Quest today, which is just based off the open source core of Google's Android. And it would also have been the operating system that would power their future AR glasses. And the report this week suggests that 300 of those people have been reassigned and that the the project is essentially scrapped. And one of the this is a report from the Information, and one of the things they suggest in it is that this may be happening so that Meta can move much faster with its products, and instead of having to start all over again from a software stack and content perspective, potentially, they can just push ahead and build out this current VR OS, is what the Quest OS is apparently called, and then make a kind of stripped down version of it for Android. Sorry, a stripped down version of it for glasses. While that may have those advantages of speed and kind of ease, it means that Meta can never truly compete with Apple in the sense of owning and building and controlling every single element of the software stack all the way down to the core. It means that these systems are going to be less than Meta could have done otherwise with their own custom system. And there's going to be other things that aren't possible. It's possible that the real reason that this happened, this project being scrapped and these team members reassigned, is that Mark Lukovsky left last year from Meta to Google. And Lukovsky was one of the key architects of Windows NT, which is the core of all Windows operating systems from the late 90s onwards. He was hired by Meta as one of their huge hires, reportedly, for a lot of money, to come and work on this project and essentially be the founder and architect of this project. And so him leaving could be the nail in the coffin. And it's important to note that the reason he told news outlets that he left was that he watched the Frances Haugen Facebook whistleblower interview and on 60 Minutes in the United States. And he said that because of what was revealed in this whistleblowing, he decided that he no longer wanted to work at Meta. So it's an example of how kind of things that may have not been in Zuckerberg or Bosworth's, timeline or roadmap or something they just didn't expect out of nowhere can really derail these projects. And it also shows how important some of these key talents, these key hires are to these big companies, because this isn't the first time that I've read about a big tech company's project grinding to a halt or being disbanded because one or a few key engineers left for whatever reason.
Yeah, so this is really delves into a lot of different subjects. This particular one, because I can imagine our readers looking at that story and going, "Isn't this normal? Like, isn't it kind of what Facebook does? Is redo itself every 6 months. Meta and Facebook kind of restructures on an ongoing basis. Their teams are constantly moving between different projects. Move fast has been their motto for a very, very long time. And I know it's only recently changing that they're trying to prioritize other things. But the thing I guess I get there is I'm wondering if the fact that this team was shuttered is any kind of a sign that they realize VR is going to have a leading edge here over AR over a longer term than they kind of expected. Because when I think of a team like Meta and what Mark Zuckerberg is trying to do, he's investing billions to answer fundamental questions about what they need to focus on. So I really wonder if there's like teams that get hired into working at Facebook or Meta, and they spend 2 or 3 years on a project simply to answer one of those questions for Mark Zuckerberg. And they might not even know that that's kind of their goal at the end of the day, is to just answer that question. Do we need to focus on this right now? And he's willing to spend millions of dollars in hiring hundreds of people to answer those questions because they need to know, is their competitor going to try to do that thing first? But this whole idea of an XROS, a single operating system that would extend from both VR experiences to AR experiences, seems to fly in the face a little bit to what we're realizing here, Heaney, is that VR headset that blocks out the world, and then sensors are used to reconstruct the physical environment and then show an AR view of your surroundings. And it's sort of like AR is an add-on and a feature that makes VR better. To a VR headset seems to be the path we're going to have over the next decade, right? We keep hearing again and again, AR gets pushed out further. Transparent optics getting affordable gets it pushed out further into the future. Is there any kind of evidence here, or do you think that's too much of a stretch here, that this is a sign that VR is going to be the near term thing for Meta over the next 5 years?
I think that's certainly possible. I think even, if you're saying that when AR glasses do come, they'll be quite separate from an experience perspective to these transparent or to these opaque headsets that I don't think will be called VR headsets over time. I think they'll just be called headsets because mixed reality would be just as important of a use case as the virtual reality applications. But I think within a headset like that, you're still going to want to use the same apps that are on AR glasses, the AR apps. It's just that the AR glasses won't be able to play the VR apps. So it sounds like if they're not going to be building their own OS from this, the strategy will be to just use Android. And we know that, there are already glasses that use Android as a base. Android is one of the most popular operating systems in the world. And what you see on a Pixel phone is actually the open source element of Android, but also kind of padded around with a lot of closed source Google services. But that open source core is used in a lot of different places. For example, Amazon's tablets and its Fire Sticks. Amazon decided to do the same as what Meta seems to be doing here, to instead of going through with the gargantuan task of making its own operating system, those Fire products use Fire OS, which is actually just Amazon's padding around the very core of Android. And so, VR OS, the Quest operating system, is just Meta's padding around the core of Android. What I think's funny about this and interesting is that reportedly Google is actually working on a completely new OS itself to succeed Android that it plans to reportedly use in its upcoming headset, which is reportedly coming in 2024, or at least planned for 2024. So it is kind of funny to see Meta continue to use Google's old operating system while Google pushes past that. And there are going to be real disadvantages to Meta of sticking with this approach. It's just not the same as building something from scratch. But it's hard to tell yet what those disadvantages will be in practicality and how those disadvantages weigh against the speed at which they can move by just taking what they have now on Quest and building out further and further and faster without actually trying to rip the whole interior out and change the entire foundations, which would, if it happens, have to, you imagine, delay the actual features by years as things are kind of re-engineered to work with the newer system.
I wonder about the move to OpenXR too. Here, I guess, is one of the big things he needs. Uh, Meta has bet and invested in supporting OpenXR across its system, and they've said for a while here, both Valve and Meta, that they're going to support this open standard, and then new features are going to be added on. And that's I guess what I'm getting at there with the AR features and the pass through are very much add-ons, I think, on top of OpenXR at this point, right? But I haven't seen what it looks like to really experience uh, proper, really excellent AR through an opaque display with OpenXR as like the foundational layer there. And I'm curious how that relates to this longer XROS system that they've decided to abandon. You ready to
Yeah, I
get into
think.
the next subject?
Well, no, I was just going to say that sticking with Android means that any Android-based headset that supports OpenXR can run these same apps that run on Quest and in future on their AR glasses. If they move to their own operating system, game engines and developers would have to kind of re-implement some things and specifically build a different app for that OS. Whereas right now, if you make an OpenXR Android VR app, that same exact app can run on Quest, can run on Vive Focus, can run on Pico. Again, I'm not 100% sure what the OpenXR support is on those two headsets, but the point I'm making here is when those headsets do have full OpenXR support and can run on Lynx when Lynx adds OpenXR support, if another company comes out next year and builds an Android-based VR headset and supports OpenXR, these same apps can work. So by essentially, as far as we know, all of the competition to Apple, except for perhaps Microsoft, if they end up entering with a VR headset running this Android core, it actually means that all of these competitors can have a similar app ecosystem, and it makes it a lot easier for developers to support all of these different headsets.
All right, I think we're ready for the last bit of meta news we have today. Because I know there's people out there just itching for us to get to the Valve and Sony stuff. So Meta showed off an AI concept video for creating VR experiences just by describing what you want out loud. Uh, I've said it before on this show. I'll say it again. The Star Trek holodeck, the future that we see in Star Trek, is the vision in my mind that I want to see the future I want to see realized. And here's Mark Zuckerberg showing off something that is almost identical to what we saw depicted in Star Trek: The Next Generation back in the early '90s and late '80s, where you can literally just tell the computer what you want and it appears right in front of you. How realistic is this, and how many years away is this from actually being something we can do, Heaney?
So yeah, this is called BuilderBot. It was shown at Meta's AI Day, which was a kind of a wider event where they were showing off their latest advances in machine learning. The two other big projects they were showing was they want to make a universal speech-to-speech translator. Today, translation goes speech to text to text to speech, but they want to have an any language to any language speech-to-speech translator. That looked pretty cool. The other project they said they're working on is a leapfrog personal assistant that goes way beyond Alexa and Google, and you can actually just have a real conversation with, and it's not going to constantly misunderstand what you want. But the third thing was a VR project called BuilderBot. And as Ian said, how it works is you simply say out loud what you want, such as a tree over there, and a picnic table over there, and an island over there, and a beach over there, and it comes to life in front of you. And as you say, it brings up kind of ideas of Star Trek's holodeck. Now, this was described by Zuckerberg as a concept, and that's a key word because it's not. It wasn't made clear how much of this is actually real. It wasn't made clear how much of this was just an idea. And one of Zuckerberg's key quotes here was that he said, hang on, it should be right here. He said, yes, there are a lot of challenges we still need to solve to make this real. So that kind of suggests to me that what we're seeing in that video either wasn't entirely real or wasn't real at all. And in particular, the delay between giving the voice command and seeing what was asked for realized seemed impossibly short to me. Then again, this was an AI day where they're showing their latest breakthroughs, so it's possible that at least some of what's seen in the video was real. But it just kind of links into this idea that we've seen from Meta over time, where they want to reduce the barrier to creating content for the metaverse from today's primary methodology of using a game engine on a computer, which is a very time intensive thing, and to make experiences, basic experiences is weeks at minimum. To make something more advanced, you're talking months or years. In Horizon worlds, just like in Rec Room, you build with your controllers by just placing shapes and using a visual scripting system. And here they're talking about going even further, where you don't even have to know how to use a gaming like touch controller and kind of navigate these intricate menus and figure out a visual scripting system. You just say what you want and it appears. So even if it's not something that's coming in the long term, it does point to a longer term future where literally anyone can make a VR experience or a VR world and live in it. And that's it is an interesting future, but it's very unclear how far we really are away from it.
Yeah, Heaney's pretty good about banging this drum that Meta does something pretty regularly that we don't see necessarily out of other companies, and that's going on recruitment drives by publishing work like this. So they sometimes Meta makes announcements and reveals work simply to get the word out there to some of the world's top researchers that we're hiring and we pay very well. When I went back and looked at, I don't know what the going rate is for an antenna engineer at the carriers or at Apple, but like they listed the salary that antenna engineer could expect for adding cellular to future devices, and it was upwards of 200 and plus thousand a year, like 250,000 plus all of the other benefits that you get, and that's like the starting salary. So you can assume that some of the people that they're looking to hire are going to negotiate way above the amount listed on the actual job listing, and that's Meta is paying just top dollar to bring in these experts to build these things that they're showing in these concept videos.
Just to
Um,
reply to Artful's
yeah,
comment here, Pixel 6 does not use speech to speech. I have a Pixel 6. It's just on device speech to text to text to speech. You're still actually, the device is still recognizing your speech into text, then translating that text into the other language, and then reading out that translated text through a text to speech system. And what Meta is saying they want to make is a model that is end to end speech to speech. End to end models are the kind of new hot thing in machine learning. Tesla is promising that they are going to develop an end to end driving model, for example. So, yeah, this would have, if Meta can pull off this translator, it would have profound implications. Even, for example, you could have, even without a speech to speech model, in AR glasses, you could look at someone and have subtitles under them if they're speaking a foreign language. But in VR, in the metaverse, you could have it where someone is speaking in a different language, and just after they speak
Babelfish.
with a little
Yeah.
bit of a delay, exactly, the Babelfish from uh, the names escaped me.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the
Hitchhiker's
Galaxy,
Guide.
and then of course Universal Translator is my Star Trek reference there. Yeah, the exact thing where you can almost hear it in real time, and maybe all you notice is their mouth moving a little bit. But if you're in VR, they could even make the mouth shapes match. Uh, you know, if they could do it in that quite a real time. Um, the the other thing that I think is interesting about this demonstration is it changes the paradigms of computing in fundamental ways. Like, one of the things I'm constantly reminded of is anyone can use Google, right? But you do need some experience using Google search to get the kind of results you want. So there is a difference between just anyone going to that search box and entering what's in their head and someone artfully going in and picking the right words in the right order to get the results that they're seeking from the outset versus sort of leaving it up to Google a little bit to make some of those choices. There's the inputs that you give that system can dictate how dynamic or good your results can be on the other side. And this shows a vision for how that paradigm gets switched. And it's like an end goal here for this is where Meta wants to be before the competition, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's such a completely different interaction method than anything we've seen before. And the promise here, based on kind of current advances in machine learning, is that these objects you see here eventually wouldn't be from a pre-selected library. The system can eventually generate them on the fly. We've seen systems that can generate images on the fly. So you say a sentence like, I want a cat sitting on an elephant, and it will generate an image that it's never seen before of exactly that. Or you can say, I want a bicycle on a yellow road, and it will generate an image that it's never seen before of a bicycle on a yellow road. So if you're here, you might be able to say something like, I want a tree that is this height and has this many branches. Or as it's generated, you can say, no, actually, half that height. And, actually, I want that island to be twice as wide. And can you also, change the rug to be a diamond pattern? And in real time, the system can kind of regenerate the environment around you to follow that. If that can be achieved anytime soon, we're going to see a explosion of virtual content that we haven't seen before, because every time that technology makes it possible for more and more people to be creators, that's exactly what you see. It's one of the reasons that TikTok is so popular right now, because they made the ability to create these short videos and this kind of content so much easier than any platform before it. On YouTube, we saw, 10 or 15, 20 years ago, consumer video editors made it possible for normal people to create the kind of content that only proper TV production crews had made before. And so it'll be interesting to see over time how much of content is still made in these game engines versus by these uh, higher level creator tools.
Mm, real interesting stuff. I think about stuff that I think was attributed to Steve Jobs. I don't know if he actually said it or if it's just a myth, but I remember this phrase of him talking about. I remember people complaining about the fact that he had to learn the mouse. I think back in the day, and there's a fair argument to be made that the people that just don't know how to use a mouse are going to eventually die. Right? They're going to get old, and all the people who are young are going to learn how to use the mouse and move forward from there. And I think of just this reality we've had over the last decade that voice interfaces have been so limited. I can't think of the number of questions I have asked my Siri, and it's just been unable to attack. And how many years of having to deal with that limited interface are going to make it hard for myself and all of our readers out there, our viewers out there, to actually embrace this interface versus the ones that they are more familiar with and grew up with, like mouse and keyboard and all those things.
Yeah, like I said, the third thing that Meta was showing at this AI Day was their own kind of in in development research on a next generation digital assistant. And as I was watching this, I noted that they often were mocking the current way that assistants like Siri and Google and Alexa work. And these Meta people were kind of just essentially saying, these systems today are pretty terrible. A lot of the example videos they gave were of the type of errors that Siri and Alexa and Google will make when you're misunderstanding. And if anyone wants to look this up, Meta's project is called Project Karaoke. And they're basically saying, with these new advances in machine learning that we are helping pioneer, like self-supervised learning and these very large end-to-end models that are trained on these huge supercomputer clusters, we may be fairly close to a future where your digital assistant doesn't constantly misunderstand you, and when it actually is a practical voice input system. Because there really has been a stagnation in these voice assistants over the past 10 years even. The experience of using Alexa today from a fundamental kind of conversational, can it understand you perspective isn't much different than when it launched. But recent advances in machine learning and what we're seeing in language models means that actual advancement in this space may be just around the corner.
Hmm. Want to say hello to Anthony out there, and Andrew, thank you for tuning in late. Be curious, Heaney and I were just discussing the timing for this show. I'd be curious if you have an ideal time for us to do this live. I'd be curious to see if you leave it in the comments, sort of make sure you include your time zone and day of the week and time. But I'd be curious if this isn't if we record this at a time that's not ideal for you, I'd be curious our viewers that tune in a lot, is there a better time? I'd just be curious to see what they all have to say.
Just going to
I'm ready to
respond
move off
to
meta. Are you ready to move off meta now, Heaney?
Yeah, I'm just going to respond to Will Veraza's comment first here. I think he was expressing some skepticism at the idea of AI models being able to generate 3D objects on the fly based on your description. I would recommend you go and watch the YouTube channel 2 Minute Papers. It's one of my favorite channels on YouTube, and it summarizes some of the recent advances in machine learning in a very kind of quick and accessible way. You would be shocked at what's currently possible and what's becoming possible with advances in machine learning. I think most people, even in the tech industry, have no idea just how fast this field is moving. And there are some truly science fiction things that are already becoming possible. So 2 Minute Papers YouTube channel, I would recommend looking into.
I want to say thank you again to our sponsor this week, Les Mills Body Combat, which brings the body combat experience to your VR headset with its extensive workout portfolio, coaching, mechanics, and you can find the link for that in our description. Les Mills Body Combat. Thank you so much for the support this month. All right. Steam Deck is a stepping stone to standalone VR. That's Gabe Newell, the president of Valve, right? Saying that, Heaney. I'm seeing viral videos supposedly of him delivering these devices. I've been waiting to verify and see that from a reputable news source that actually is Gabe Newell delivering these Steam Decks to the early buyers. What exactly is this statement, and what can we sort of divine from the latest comments here?
Yeah, I saw those videos as well. It certainly looks to be Gabe Newell, and it kind of echoes what we saw in 2016 when Palmer Luckey was delivering the first Oculus Rifts by hand. Obviously, it's in both cases, it's just a fun little PR stunt, but interesting nonetheless. But yeah, we saw that in a magazine called Edge magazine, which I actually went and bought the edition for these comments to see what Gabe was saying, because they had promoted that they had an interview with Gabe. He was basically talking about how the chip in the Steam Deck, which is a custom APU from AMD, Valve and helped AMD design this chip for their exact needs in this handheld console. And so Gabe said, and I'm going to quote him here, one of the things Deck represents is battery capable, high performance horsepower that eventually you could use in VR applications as well. You can take the PC and build something that is much more transportable We're not really yet there yet, but this is a stepping stone. And then in a separate interview today, which Jamie posted on UploadVR.com, you can go and read that article just out today. He also said, then if you flip it around and you look at it as a highly performant mobile PC gaming device, you can sort of say, well, why can't I have that in a tetherless integrated VR solution? And, I think Jamie's kind of comment on Twitter was very funny where he said, why not? Exactly, Gabe. Why don't you tell us? Why not? Why isn't that Valve standalone headset out yet?
Hmm.
But I guess what the suggestion of we're not really there yet is saying that the performance of these chips isn't quite to the level that Valve wants to push. This key phrase here was high performance horsepower. The chip in this system, the Steam Deck, is more powerful than the Quest 2, but it's still considerably less powerful than the PCs that were available when the HTC Vive launched, even back in 2016, and considerably less powerful than the kind of PC you would need to play something like Half-Life Alyx. So what I take from this is that Valve definitely is working on a standalone headset, but it's waiting for the performance of these mobile chips to get a little bit further or just get to some point where they consider that it can deliver the kind of fidelity that Valve wants to deliver in experiences like Alyx.
I've brought this question up to you several times when this has come up of just things like whether reprojection can be used to cross the gap here. I think there's two other things that I guess I'll just throw at you, Heaney. Samsung sort of released a technology to a display tech to hide the lines, the screen door effect, basically from their displays, as well as the fact that the original PSVR1 ran at 1080p. Right? It was not a high resolution display, yet it was the highest selling headset for several years here. And I think I guess you would point out that this is just slightly above 720p, and that's why it's able to run so much of the PC library so great. I just have people know that Half-Life Alyx is going to be Valve's benchmark. I just have to wonder how many years. Like it seems so implausible right now that a standalone is going to run Half-Life Alyx anytime soon. But I have to wonder if Valve is dedicated enough and has enough resources and these things that I'm talking about, let them close that gap at all.
Yeah, technologies like motion smoothing that we see on Steam VR and asynchronous space warp that we see on the Oculus platform, these frame extrapolation technologies can certainly help. And we've seen that that's come to Quest 2 recently, and you get maybe a 50 or 70% improvement, but that still leaves a huge gap between where we are today with mobile chips and where we were with PCs when something like Alyx launched, as you point out. One of the technologies that is emerging recently that could really potentially help close this gap is neural upsampling. So it kind of comes back to this AI discussion we've had before. And AI is going to be an incredibly important part of the future of VR and AR. That's very clear. And there was a lot of speculation last year that Nintendo might actually use this on Switch. So it's a technology that's available on PC GPUs, on your NVIDIA and AMD GPUs now, where a neural network can take a lower resolution image and upscale it significantly.
I feel like
To
rickrolling you, right?
you
Because
feel like
that's
rickrolling
the
me.
one in my mind. There's a Rick Astley rickroll video that does this process, right? And gets it
Yeah,
up to 1080p.
yeah, you can see a lot of kind of pre-rendered upscaling done on the internet. That's something that's widely accessible. It's a lot more challenging to do it in real time and with low latency, and that's something we have seen NVIDIA and AMD achieve. There was speculation that Nintendo might release a Switch that does this, and we saw actually research a few years ago from Meta about the idea of using this in a standalone headset's graphics pipeline. They had really dug into what are the challenges that need to happen to make this actually run with a low latency for every frame. And they were showing, the potential here that in the long term, you could upscale by something like 16 times. So your headset is only actually rendering a very, very low resolution, and then the upscaling algorithm does the rest. The problem, of course, there was that the GPU power needed to do the upscaling in real time like that was something like four $10,000 NVIDIA GPUs. So getting this into a mobile chip is going to be a big achievement, whether we see it happen in something like a Nintendo Switch Pro first, or whether we see it happen in smartphones, or whether it happens in one of the consoles, that one of the portable consoles like this. But yeah, there are potential possibilities for leapfrog technologies like this that could close the gap between PC today and standalone tomorrow. Of course, what people will point out then is that PC tomorrow, of course, will use the same technology to leap even further ahead. But if they can even deliver today's experience, then they can bring all of that content on Steam VR over to a standalone headset. Other than that, if they can't achieve that, it's just not going to be possible to put Steam VR's content library onto a standalone headset in the near term. I think there's no one that would disagree with that, simply because these are games that are designed to run on powerful gaming PCs. The other path Valve could go down, though, is do what Meta did. It didn't just, build a x86 Windows system into a headset and port over the Rift content. Instead, every single Quest app that came over from Rift or from Steam VR is a specifically optimized app where the developers have to heavily simplify the graphics, reduce some of the AI, reduce things like physics calculations, just bring the performance of every aspect of their title down to work. How Valve would do this in practice is the big question there. Would this be a subsection of Steam, VR titles for standalone headset, or would it be a separate store? Because there's no real point in giving people access to a store full of games that the hardware would just run at 2 frames per second. Would this have to be a separate store? And in that case, would Valve still be advancing their core interest of making Steam as it exists today, available on more platforms? Or would that kind of be a fracturing and splintering of the company and its strategy in VR? There would be a lot of confusion there. What is also possible is that Valve never intends to actually release a standalone VR gaming device, and that the standalone aspects of the headset could be more basic things like having 12 virtual monitors around you and using it like a PC, because Gabe talked here about you can take the PC and build something much more transportable. And in that case, you would still need your PC, your gaming PC, to play games, and you would still be getting those games from Steam as it exists today. But the headset would be usable for much more basic tasks, and maybe even with its own mini store of mobile-like games. There's a lot of potential avenues Valve could take this, but right now it's very unclear what their actual plans here are, other than that it seems pretty clear that they're working on something, whatever it is.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. Two things I want to get into our last subject here, but I'm noticing a lot of our commenters sort of mad at themselves for not jumping at the Steam Deck when they first saw it go on sale and get their place in line. I'm with you there. I'm now regretting that I didn't get in line as quickly as I could to get my hands on this as fast as possible, because it does feel like some of the things that Valve and Gabe Newell are saying about what this represents to them as a company, PC as a platform, is pretty significant. But I guess I'll just the question I want to put you on the spot about is this hardware effort seems like it's going to be more significant to Valve's bottom line than Index was. And I say that even though the Valve Index headset was like by gross revenue, wasn't it on Steam's top sellers month after month after month for a very, very long time?
Yeah, it is. And as you point out, that rating is for revenue. So a game that costs $20 would have to sell 50 copies to get in the same ranking as one Index sale. So it doesn't say that it's selling more than games, but this, it is a significant seller. And I would say, given that it's still at $1,000, they're probably making some kind of healthy margin there, even if they weren't at the start. We're almost 3 years on, so they probably are making a reasonable margin, which always makes me wonder, why did we see the Index launch at that kind of pricing and then see the Steam Deck launch at $350 isn't the entry model, where Gabe has talked about that actually hurting them. He's talked about the fact that they are potentially selling this entry model Steam Deck at cost or some sort of loss, whereas with the Index, and the base stations, being $150 each and the controllers being $280 for a pair, it certainly doesn't seem like they're doing that there. I wonder if we would see another VR headset be relegated to the high pricing of Index, or whether we could see some aggressive pricing from Valve in a
Mm.
future VR product.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things history-wise that I think Valve kind of learned from, right? The Vive, right, tried to compete as the high-end product against the Rift, and Facebook just slashed prices. They just summer after summer took it lower and widened that gap enough to squash Vive into a smaller portion of the market, even as a generally regarded as a superior product in significant ways, or in ways that will really have won out over the long term, right? You have to go and spend so much extra to get the room scale tracking out of the Oculus ecosystem, where it comes out of the box for every single Vive sold with the dual base stations. Um, and over here, you've got this different situation where it's not PCs they're necessarily competing with. There's the Switch that is starting now at $200, so $199 for this entry level Switch. And when you talk about like cutting down to the bare minimum, resolution wise, cost wise, $200 is cutting so much out. Like, I saw Mark Gurman over at Bloomberg recently writing about Apple trying to get to $200 for an iPhone. You can go and get the last year model iPhone for $200 is what Mark Gurman was proposing over there. And it's just interesting. Like, consumer behaviors are different at that $200 price, and the size of the market that you can reach at that price is just so much larger than everything you can reach at the higher prices, that like, Valve needs to know what percentage of their audience is going to strip Steam out of this and install Windows, or do all the things that a PC owner really wants to do, so that they know at the end of the day uh, how many, what kind of return they get out of the Steam store per device sold. And that's going to form a lot of these next generation things as far as how much they can discount a standalone. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Valve has the unique advantage of being the kind of dominant PC platform across whether it be Linux or Windows. You're always going to still be getting your content from Steam. I don't think Valve would have to worry about, in a standalone situation, people getting VR games from anywhere but Steam, simply because the Windows Store's selection of VR games is pitiful. It's tiny. Microsoft launched a few content there and abandoned it. I don't think the Epic Store even officially supports VR games, although there are a few that are kind of there by, you can change the launch parameters or whatever and run them in VR. So I don't think they have to worry about that. And Valve's kind of unique strength is that it is on this software platform. But again, it's just how they're going to manage this idea of, do you make a separate splintered off store for standalone content, or stick to the PC store of Steam and somehow bring it through streaming?
Yeah, I'm seeing people really responding to your idea here that, like, a lot of people are bringing up Guy Godin, the creator of Virtual Desktop, and I've joked sort of in the back of my mind, why doesn't Valve or Steam buy Virtual Desktop and turn that into, Steam on Quest, right? And then they've got a route to getting all of their content onto Quest, and then maybe they could do their own standalone headset,
Well,
and you've got the proper experience with yeah, that route of getting onto multiple devices, getting Steam onto more platforms, and having that sectioned off portion of the Steam store for device, apps that they have ensured run properly on that device.
Well, they already are in Steam in that way. The 50% we reported last time, 50% of the users of Steam VR are Quest 2 users. Valve already is on this hardware. And it's one of the reasons why Valve doesn't actually need to rush its own VR hardware out there as much as some people might think. Because even when you're buying a Quest 2, if you're going to buy PC games, I think it's safe to say that most people are going to do that on Steam rather than on the Rift store that comes with Link. That in past years, we heard from developers that when the Rift S and the Rift were popular, a lot more people bought from the Rift store than you might expect. But over time, as Meta has shifted its focus away from there, as the newer titles don't even come out on the Rift store anymore, and as Steam VR has just improved its support for Oculus devices so much, with every update, every major update, Steam VR makes the experience of using a Quest with it a little better, a little more convenient, a little faster. All of these little improvements mean that Valve doesn't even have to do any work. Everyone else has built the infrastructure for them to continue to make money on this. And just to kind of explain our point here too, Desitronic is pointing out that the Steam Deck doesn't have a separate store, so why would the why would the VR headset need to? As you said earlier, and as we talked about last week on this show, the reason that the Steam Deck doesn't have a separate store is that it can run everything. And the reason that it can run everything is because this screen is only over 720p. But that same idea just doesn't translate to VR. You can't make a standalone VR headset doesn't run at a significantly lower resolution than a PC headset. Obviously, you're going to run slightly lower, but this is like orders of magnitude lower than, if you're playing on a PC at 4K or something like that. Whereas, well, not an order of magnitude. It's about 8 times lower than if you're playing on a PC at 4K. So you don't have to use anywhere near the same horsepower. That's why they might have to have a separate store on standalone, just like Quest is, because you've said that they could just mark some games as verified. There is almost no game on Steam VR that would run properly at a decent resolution and frame rate on this chip. The chip that this thing's using, that Gabe is talking about potentially using in a headset, it's a budget gaming laptop GPU. That's essentially what it is.
So, but going back to putting you on the spot here, when do you think we're going to have this? That's the other question we're going to have week after week. And I'm not going to hold you to this. This is pure speculation. Forgive Heaney for being wrong on this. But when does a standalone headset from Valve actually get to consumers?
That is a great question, and we saw late last year that YouTuber Bradley Lynch had found references to Valve working on a standalone headset in the Steam VR driver files. So it's definitely being worked on. No one is questioning that Valve is working on something like this. But companies like Valve, and especially Valve in many cases, work on these projects for years sometimes, years before they're released, or sometimes years before the project is scrapped. And at the time that Lynch was reporting those findings in the Steam VR files, Ars Technica came along and said that their sources confirmed that this project, Deckard, was being worked on at Valve. But they noted that they were skeptical of it releasing anytime soon because their sources also told them that Valve's manufacturing lines are dedicated to Steam Deck. And as some people have pointed out, if you order a Steam Deck right now, you're not going to get it anytime soon. Valve is struggling with demand of the Steam Deck, and it's going to be struggling with demand for the Steam Deck probably for the next year, realistically. And so I don't think Valve has the manufacturing capacity to simultaneously launch a separate, entirely new hardware product this year. So personally, I think it's going to happen next year at the earliest. And again, you've already given the caveat that I could be completely wrong. We could get out of this show and turn around and Valve's just announced a headset. But I think based on how long it's going, based on Gabe's comment about the fact that we're not there yet, based on the fact that the chip that this thing uses, that he's made that comment about, is brand new. The RDNA2 technology in this is very recent for these kind of products. When you design these chips, at least 6 months in advance of the product releasing, in many cases 18 or 12 months in advance. I think we're probably looking at next year at the very earliest. I don't think a Valve standalone headset is around the corner. And that's unfortunate.
How much will it cost, Heaney?
How much would it cost? Let me just finish my sentence in saying that would be unfortunate because I think it would be one of the best things that could happen to competition in the VR space, because Valve is one of the few other companies other than Meta that really understands VR. How much will it cost? It depends. If Gabe wants to use the same strategy that he's described using with Steam Deck and sell at cost, then I think they can be very competitive with Meta. I don't think they're going to be able to get it down to Quest 2 pricing, but I don't think it's unreasonable to say that we could see something that is sub $500.
Yeah, I saw someone in the comments made me think about this, but I've been talking about those levers that I would expect Meta to try to pull in terms of like plan I think we're
I'm back.
back. That was it's wild whenever Heaney disappears out of there because my red light over there dies. Heaney disappears, and I have to wonder if I'm just in a universe by myself. Like it's a Twilight Zone episode where just for 30 seconds I'm in a universe by myself. Really weird. All right. I think we're ready to get into the last subject here. The thing I was gonna, the last subject I wanted to get in there. I would be really curious if Steam or Valve ever tried to do something like a payment program or something like that, and tried to get there before Meta, because I do kind of expect Meta and Facebook to do some things like pushing like a buyback program. You brought up that in an editorial. Um, very very great editorial talking about how a buyback program could benefit Meta, and it kind of seems like an obvious solution since it's something everyone else does or Apple is doing. But monthly payments would also make that upfront cost a lot lower. It'd be amazing to see Steam somehow get there, and Valve offering hardware on a payment program to bring that cost down.
So I
Ready
think
for the last
Valve's
subject here?
problem. I was just going to say, I think the problem with Valve is facing is not a demand problem. With the Index and with Steam Deck right now, and for the foreseeable future, they're facing a supply problem. So I don't think they need to try and bring the cost significantly down. As someone in the comments pointed out, I think it was Artful, but I'm not 100% sure. Gabe actually noted that the highest priced Steam Deck model is the one that's been ordered the most, which is fascinating. So I think Valve's going to really, if they want to expand things with a buyback program or some sort of monthly payment or things like that, they're going to want to significantly ramp up their manufacturing capacity first. And it's not clear that Valve wants to be a super mass market company yet, because there is a lot that comes with scaling up to ship tens of millions of units of hardware in a year rather than just a few million.
All right, so our last subject here. Basically, a year after the initial confirmation and announcement of PSVR2, we've actually gotten our look at the final headset design. What can we learn from this image? Because there's this image, and I think 2 or 3 others that Sony has revealed right now. I very much enjoy the Baymax face here that people can obviously point out. And yeah, just what can we learn from this, Heaney?
So I think one of the disappointing things we learned, and the first thing I really noticed, was that the cable here looks to be, based on every other cable I've seen that looks like that, non-detachable. And we've known since PlayStation VR specs were announced that this thing is a tethered headset. It uses a single cable, which is a big improvement over the PlayStation VR1, which was a mess of different cables to get it plugged into your TV. And I think for many people, the biggest barrier to regularly using it was that mess of cables. Going to a single USB-C cable is a huge improvement, but it's still a single cable. And there was speculation that there may be some sort of wireless adapter that you could put in place of the cable. But I think seeing that non-detachable cable end here pretty much kills that idea. So it's extremely unlikely that there will be a wireless adapter, because you would have to wrap a 5 meter cable around yourself and plug it into the wireless adapter to get that to work. So I've been on the record in saying that I am very disappointed in the PlayStation VR2 being wired. I think it's an amazing device based on the specs that we've seen so far in every other aspect. I think it's going to be a lot of fun for people to buy it. I'm not saying it's going to fail. I'm sure it'll sell well. But releasing a tethered headset in the age of Quest is certainly a disappointment and does limit this device's wider prospects. What this says to me is that if we do see wireless on PlayStation VR, it will be through a future model or through a pro model.
I'm seeing commenters here mentioning the apparent lack of built-in audio. I've been messing with HomePods recently. I got the HomePods for my TV, and it's the first time in recent memory that I have proper stereo. I've bought sound bars, and there's stereo coming out of the TV, but I've never jumped at one of those 5.1 systems where you can put speakers around your room and get even 5 channels of audio. I've never really properly had 2 channels of audio on either side of me, and it's really dramatic, the change in audio experience from going from audio that's sitting over there on the flat TV to audio that's properly on either side of me. And yeah, it's $200. That's a significant price to have stereo speakers, but it's cheaper than a $500 speaker system. I am curious if this system can work with that kind of an audio system. Do you think we could have like a distributed audio system that might work with a Sony system in any way?
So you're saying there could be a external surround sound system that would map the audio based on how you're positioning your head? It's
Yeah,
certainly
I
an
mean, if yeah,
I mean,
they've
certainly
got a
an
map of
interesting
your
idea.
room based on where the cameras are. Why couldn't they use that to incorporate, to drive the speakers in intelligent ways?
I'm sure they could, but surround sound setups are very uncommon these days. We're in the age of sound bars. So I think the vast majority of people who are using this headset are going to have the audio blasting from their TV in front of them, which is obviously just nowhere near as compelling as having true spatial audio. I'm going to correct myself from a few minutes ago where I said that in every other way, I think this is a great headset, because you're absolutely right. That is the other big missing aspect of this headset, that there is no integrated audio. Pretty much every headset that we've seen announced in the past 2 years from big companies and small companies has some sort of strap pipe audio. And while the quality is never good in strap pipe audio, just having that as the default so that every player has surround sound, sorry, not surround sound, has positional audio, is such a game changer from VR, because it's something sounding like it comes really from your left or from behind you or from above you is such a big part of actually feeling like you're in a virtual space. So obviously you can still plug headphones into this thing, and some people will do that, but it adds a little bit of extra friction where instead of just putting the headset on and having that audio by default, you then have to kind of go and put this other cable in and plug it there and make sure it's not kind of tangling around this cable. Or you can maybe use Sony's wireless headset, but that has its own problems in that, what if it's out of battery? I have three things you have to charge. You have the controllers and the audio. So it just seems like a big disappointment to not have that there. I was really, really hoping for PlayStation VR2 to have positional audio, and I guess this kind of crosses that out.
Well, there's the Sony does sell those Pulse 3D, I think is what they're called. Those dedicated headphones for the PS5 as it is right now, and it's easy to imagine those working together. And I'm seeing commenters
Is it?
complaining.
I'm
What?
trying to look at that. I don't know if they would actually fit over there. How would that
Yeah,
not
I'm.
interfere with the cable? That's what I was
I
staring at this for.
yeah, we're going to focus in on this because I'm seeing commenters point this out, and it's a great observation that isn't that the point, basically the same point on the headset where the cable broke on the Rift? Like, isn't that the same area of the headset that had all those problems?
Um, oh yeah, as in, well, that was the problem, is that they were trying to. Oh, where have my hands gone? There they are. The problem was that they were trying to bring, audio through here with a wire, as in they're trying to communicate audio information. So it broke on the Rift as it expanded. I don't think there's going to be a break point here, but this is the same position that it came out on the PlayStation VR1. And I never found it comfortable to use headphones with that thing. It just felt like putting kind of two clamps on you. You kind of have this clamp and then this clamp. Again, I'll say this is just so disappointing that this is what Sony have gone for their audio experience. Because look at the specs of this device. You've got a high resolution HDR OLED display. You've got eye tracking. You have freaking face vibration. All of these amazing specs in this headset, and yet there's no built-in audio. That would have added a couple of extra dollars to their BOM cost here. It's inexplicable that they don't do this, and I really hope the reason isn't trying to sell Pulse headsets, because I don't think that really is going to be bought by most people, and I don't think that's going to make for a better default VR experience, because it really is all about the default. What can developers assume as the experience that is the baseline? Because if the last headset we saw that was kind of widely available that didn't have this was the Gear VR, and a lot of developers there complained about that fact, that what was the point in them putting all this effort into spatial audio when you were just getting mono audio blasted in front of you? I've heard some people say something like, "Oh, it's fine because people are normally, using their TV audio," and it's like, no, come on, that's just coming at you from one direction. That's not the same at all.
Is there any audio coming out of the controllers, like it does on the DualSense? And yeah.
That's a great question. Again, it still wouldn't, be able to be suitable for positional audio, but I guess that could definitely add something if you have kind of held objects in your hand and you weren't using headphones. But then again, developers can't assume that, because if you are using headphones, you're not going to hear this audio. That would only have worked if they had gone with the strap pipe audio.
Hmm. The other thing I think is the takeaway here, because this uses inside out tracking, and because these controllers look so different from the original moves, there's going to be a large amount of changes needed to the original PSVR library games to make them run properly on these devices, isn't it, Heaney?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see direct porting at all. I don't think we're going to see this automatically support the PlayStation VR library for that exact reason. The reason that we saw, Quest content is automatically compatible with Quest 2, the reason that all Rift content worked seamlessly with Rift S was that Meta stuck with the same controller design, the same buttons and the same thumbsticks, even though the tracking had changed. That doesn't matter to the application. What matters is that kind of layout. And so it's great to see that we now have thumbsticks and buttons on the faces of these controllers. It's something that people have been asking for a lot, but it does mean that the kind of content that we already see on PlayStation is going to have to be ported. But I don't see that as a problem. I think Sony is a company that's used to paying developers and helping developers port over to the latest hardware. And that's something they've done for generations. They have great relations with a lot of these game studios. So I would love to see them let you use the Move controllers with this, because there's no reason that those cameras couldn't track the orbs on the Move controllers. I'm not saying to use that over these. I'm just saying to be able to use that for the legacy PlayStation VR 1 library. But it's possible that because of all of the changes to the kind of displays, if Sony has gone for canting or something like that, where the displays are turned outwards, if there's a very different distortion matrix, applications might have to be updated anyway to run on the headset. So it may not be that the controllers are holding that back. But yeah, to me, I think it's extremely unlikely we're going to see PlayStation VR content playable on this by default.
And that's pretty significant. If we're, that's a lot of developers with content on a headset that they need to, be motivated in order to get it ready for this one. And that's a lot of buyers out there that could be in a frustrating position if they're not able to really get their stuff that they invested in Sony up to speed on the PSVR2. So it can also affect timelines, right? There's obviously the manufacturing timeline that Sony might be on to get these into, manufacture these in significant numbers to actually meet demand when it actually hits. But if they don't have the right amount of content ready to go on day one, that also might affect when they're actually able to put this out into market. Um, the thing I'm just so kind of obsessed now with this idea around 3D audio, and people in our comments are talking about whether it might have built-in audio, and we just haven't really seen it detailed yet. But I'm obsessed with this idea, Heaney. That the one that it gets me is I have yet the lab from 2016, Valve's introductory experience that they kind of built to introduce the Vive, had this bow and arrow game, and it was eye-opening for me how great simple haptics could make you feel at pulling back a bow, right? And these have the resistive triggers that can give you a sense of tension. And I'm kind of obsessed now with this idea that you could hear the bow string pulling back at the right audio space for you, wherever you are. Like this idea that you could hold the bow over here and have the audio come from over here, or hold the bow over here and have it come over here while you're getting this haptic sense, could be a really big step forward. Um, but I know a lot of people out there have AirPods and been kind of blown away by the spatial tech that Apple has been rolling out, where you turn your head away from your phone and you hear spatial audio kind of fooling you into looking back at your phone and knowing where the audio is coming out of your phone with no AR or VR involved at the process at all. I do think audio could be a really big element of this that we haven't really seen yet. I think we're ready.
Yeah,
I'm ready to wrap this up, Heaney. Any last comments?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of comment on what the commenters are saying there about 3D audio and what you're saying. Yeah, this system has full support for it, just as Steam Audio has full support for positional audio, just as the Oculus Audio SDK. It's about the hardware. It's about the fact that by default, you put this thing on and the audio is coming from your TV, and there is simply no way to make it sound like audio that is coming from only in front of you is coming from behind you. It's just not something that's physically possible. So
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's just, I think they could still, like, that still feels like it could be a decent fallback, right? Like, yes, it's limited, but if it's still positionally relevant when you're facing it, like, that's still, like, I would rather have the audio sound wrong than have my tracking on my controllers fail when I turn around. Like, I'm going to be
yeah, I get you.
disturbed or bothered by the audio, but not as much as my hands disappearing.
I just think both of these things are fundamental. For a good VR experience, it's spatial audio is a fundamental. Sounds have to sound like they're coming from where they are, or else you just don't feel like you're in a virtual world. You can try it today if you go into an experience, if you build something in Unity, you can turn spatial audio off, and you see just how much it changes the experience. One of the key things that makes it feel like I'm actually kind of sitting across from Ian here is the fact that his audio is coming from over there. It doesn't sound like it's coming from over here. And when I press something on my tablet, it sounds like the little beep that it makes. We don't transmit that across because there's no point. That would just kind of be annoying for the audience. But I can hear that beeping there. And when I cast something to this screen, I hear a little ding that comes from the screen. But I do think you're right to say that haptics is going to be the one place where PlayStation VR pushes way above any platform we have today. None of the controllers have the kind of haptics that are in the DualSense gamepad. Bringing that to here is going to be a huge game changer for those things like pulling back a bow you're talking about, and many other applications we haven't even thought about yet. And of course, the fact that the headset itself has rumble means that when you get shot or when some kind of explosion happens near you, you're going to feel that more than any other platform. It's just so disappointing that by default, you're not going to hear it in the same fidelity as other platforms.
Hmm. Well, I think that's it for us this week. Thank you so much for tuning in to the VR download. We'll be back next Monday. Check uploadvr.com for the latest news. We're constantly going out there and vetting everything that's happening in the VR space. Thank you so much to our commenters. We'll be back, I think, next Monday, unless we decide to change the time. We'll have that debate off live. And then on Thursday, check out the Gamescast, where Jamie and Harry have been diving into the very latest news in games, and it's going to be a very busy couple weeks, I think, for game releases. So make sure to tune into that show. And thank you so much. We'll see you in the future.
People are asking where Kyle is. He is working on a special project right now, which I am sure within a couple of weeks or whenever that's planned to be revealed, you will see. But yeah, Kyle is working on a special project.
I could be bespectacled. I could put glasses on if people really need that.
We'll put glasses on you, Ian. We will see you in the future.
I'll see ya.